I asked my daughter when her engagement party was. She said, "Oh, that was yesterday. Just close friends." A week later, in a panic, she called, "My card won't work." I calmly replied, "The air in my office always smells the same, a comforting mix of old paper, cedar from the pencils I still insist on using, and the faint, clean scent of the polish the cleaning crew uses on my mahogany desk every Tuesday night. It's a smell of stability, of things earned. It's the smell of my life's work, a construction business I built from the ground up, with 2 calloused hands and a stubborn refusal to fail. That Tuesday, the 18th of August, in the year 2025, felt no different from any other. Sunlight streamed through the large window that overlooked the bustling downtown streets, dust motes dancing in the golden shafts of light. I was looking over the blueprints for the new community center, a project I was particularly proud of, tracing the lines for the foundation with a fingertip. It was quiet. The only sound the soft hum of the central air and the distant, muted symphony of the city. A car horn, a siren, the general murmur of a world in motion. My thoughts drifted, as they often did, to my late wife, Sarah. She would have loved this project. She was the one with the real vision, the one who saw not just buildings, but homes. Not just structures, but communities. She had a way of looking at a set of plans and seeing the families that would live there, the children who would play in the yards. I was the nuts and bolts, the concrete and steel, the man who made sure the walls wouldn't fall down. She was the heart that made it a home. It had been 5 years since she was gone, but the ache of her absence was a constant companion, a dull pressure behind my ribs that flared up in quiet moments like this. Our daughter, Jessica, was the living, breathing legacy of that love. She had her mother's eyes, that same vibrant shade of green that could sparkle with mischief or soften with empathy. Or so I had always believed. The phone on my desk buzzed, pulling me from my reverie. It was Jessica. A smile touched my lips automatically. We hadn't spoken in a few days, which was unusual for us. Since Sarah passed, Jessica and I had become a unit, a team of 2 navigating the world. I picked up the receiver, the cool plastic familiar in my hand. "Hey, sweetie, I was just thinking about you." "Hey, Dad," she said. Her voice was bright, almost unnaturally so. It was a little too quick, a little too high-pitched. It was the voice she used when she was trying to breeze past something. "How's work? Still playing with your big boy Lego bricks?" I chuckled. It was our old joke. Something like that. Building a new community center over on the west side. It's a good one. I paused, waiting for her to ask about it, to show the kind of interest her mother always would have. But the silence stretched just a beat too long. "So, what's up? Everything okay?" "Oh yeah, everything's amazing," she chirped. "Liam and I are just so happy. We're having the best time." Liam, her fiancé of 3 months. He was a financial advisor, handsome in that slick catalog model way, with a smile that seemed a little too practiced and eyes that never quite settled on you. He came from what people called old money, though I'd learned in my line of work that old money was often just old debt with a better publicist. I wasn't his biggest fan, but Jessica was smitten, and for her, I tried. I really did. I hosted them for dinner, listened to Liam's long-winded stories about his family's yacht club, and nodded along when he explained complex financial instruments that sounded, to my simple ears, like sophisticated ways to lose money. "That's great, Jess. I'm glad to hear it," I said, my voice genuine. Her happiness was paramount. "Listen," I was thinking, We haven't heard anything about the engagement party. Your mother always said you should never rush these things, but you should also never leave your guests guessing. Is there a date set? I want to make sure I clear my schedule. I pictured it in my mind. A warm evening in the backyard of our family home, string lights twinkling in the old oak tree, Sarah's favorite hydrangeas in full bloom. A gathering of true friends and family to celebrate a new chapter. There was a tiny, almost imperceptible pause on the other end of the line. It was the kind of hesitation that speaks volumes, a silent gap where a simple answer should have been, "Oh," she said. And that one word was loaded with a strange, dismissive energy. Yeah, we did that already. The blueprints on my desk suddenly seemed to blurry. The lines swam before my eyes. You did? When? It was yesterday, Dad, she said, her voice still attempting that breezy tone. But now it sounded strained, like a rubber band pulled too tight. It was just a small thing. Super last minute. Just, our close friends. Eleanor, Liam's mom, she wanted to host something intimate at their club. It was really no big deal. No big deal. The words echoed in the sudden, cavernous silence of my office. Yesterday. I had spent yesterday evening alone, eating a microwave dinner and watching some old black and white movie, wondering why Jessica hadn't returned my call from the afternoon. An engagement party. Her engagement party. And I, her father, the man who had held her hand as she took her first steps, the man who had sat in the front row of every school play and soccer game, the man who had walked her through the unfathomable grief of losing her mother, was not considered a close friend. I felt a cold sensation spread through my chest, a chilling numbness that was somehow worse than sharp pain. I stared at the photograph on my desk, a smiling 7-year-old Jessica on my shoulders at a 4th of July parade, a tiny American flag in her hand. Sarah stood beside us, laughing, her arm around my waist. We were a family, a complete, unbreakable unit. "Oh," I managed to say, my own voice sounding distant and hollow to my ears. "I see. At the country club." I knew the place. The Crestwood Hills Country Club. A place where membership fees were more than my first house. A place where people went to be seen, not to have intimate gatherings. "Yeah," she rushed on, sensing my change in tone. "It was all Eleanor's idea. You know how she is. She just took over. And it all happened so fast. We were going to call you, but things got so crazy. You know how it is." I didn't. I didn't know how it was. I didn't know how a daughter could have a party celebrating the biggest decision of her life and not invite her only living parent. I didn't understand the logic. My mind raced, trying to find a reason, an excuse I could latch onto. Maybe it was an oversight, a terrible, horrible, thoughtless oversight. But deep down, a colder, more painful truth began to form. This wasn't an oversight. This was a choice. "Well," I said, my throat feeling tight and dry, "I hope you had a good time." It was the only thing I could think to say. The automatic, polite response of a stranger. "It was amazing," she gushed. And in her voice, I heard not a hint of remorse. Only the self-absorbed excitement of someone who hadn't considered the feelings of the person on the other end of the line. Eleanor knows everyone. We met so many important people. Liam says these connections will be great for his career. And for us. Us. The word hung in the air. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I was included in that us anymore. I looked around my office, at the awards on the wall, the photos, the tangible evidence of a life built on integrity and hard work. I had provided Jessica with everything. A beautiful home, a top-tier education with 0 student debt, a generous allowance that meant she never had to worry about a single bill, a credit card linked to my account for emergencies that had, over time, become a source for designer clothes and lavish spa days. I never begrudged her any of it. I wanted her to have a life free from the struggles I had faced. I thought I was giving her a foundation. But maybe I was just building a gilded cage for a cuckoo who was ready to fly to a different nest, leaving the old one to rot. "I have to go, Dad," she said abruptly. "Liam's here to pick me up. We're going to look at some floral arrangements for the wedding. Talk soon. Love you." And with a click, she was gone. I held the receiver in my hand for a long time, listening to the dial tone's monotonous hum. It was the loneliest sound in the world. Love you. The words, once a source of warmth, now felt like a casual, thoughtless sign-off, like sincerely at the end of a business letter. I slowly placed the phone back in its cradle. The silence of the room rushed back in, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating. I leaned back in my leather chair, the familiar creak doing nothing to comfort me. I felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if the floor had dropped out from under me. The man who could build skyscrapers suddenly felt like he was standing on shifting sand. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the room and painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Sarah had loved sunsets. She'd say they were the sky's way of taking a deep breath before nightfall. I couldn't breathe. I thought about Liam's mother, Eleanor, a woman with a face so tightly pulled it looked like she was perpetually bracing against a strong wind. I'd met her twice. She had looked at me with a polite, dismissive smile, her eyes scanning my simple, well-made suit as if it were a cheap rental. She'd asked me what I did, and when I said construction, she'd replied with a tinkling little laugh. "Oh, how quaint." In her world, you didn't do construction. You hired people who did construction. I was staff. And it clicked. The cold, hard, devastating puzzle piece slid into place. I wasn't good enough for them. My calloused hands, my lack of a centuries-old family name, my life spent building tangible things instead of managing inherited wealth. It was an embarrassment. And my daughter, my Jessica, had gone along with it. She had chosen the shimmering, hollow allure of the Parkers' world over the solid, unpretentious foundation of her own family. The hurt was physical. It was a stone in my gut. I closed my eyes, and the image of her as a little girl on my shoulders was replaced by the imagined scene from the night before. Jessica, radiant in a new dress, laughing with Liam and his important friends in a room I wasn't welcome in. The thought was a betrayal sharper than any knife. For the first time in 5 years, the grief I felt wasn't for my wife. It was for my daughter. Or rather, for the daughter I thought I had. The week that followed was one of the strangest of my life. It was a masterclass in pretending. I went to work, I chaired meetings, I signed checks and approved material orders. On the surface, everything was normal. I was Michael Carter, owner of Carter Construction, a man known for his steady hand and calm demeanor. But beneath the surface, a quiet, seismic shift was taking place. Every interaction, every memory, was now viewed through a new, tainted lens. The foundation of my world had a hairline crack, and I couldn't stop probing it, wondering how deep it went and when the whole structure might give way. I tried to call Jessica a couple of times. It was a pathetic attempt, really, to see if anything had changed, to see if a sliver of guilt had pierced through her bubble of blissful self-absorption. Our conversations were brief and stilted. She was always rushing, always on her way to somewhere fabulous with Liam or Eleanor. "We're at the jeweler's, Dad, looking at settings. Eleanor is taking me for a dress fitting. It's a designer from Paris. You wouldn't even believe it. We're doing a tasting at the caterers Liam's parents have used for years." Each sentence was a tiny, perfectly polished dagger, reminding me of the world she was building, a world where I was an outsider looking in. She never once mentioned the engagement party again. It was as if it hadn't happened, or more accurately, as if my exclusion from it was so normal, so expected, that it wasn't worth discussing. The silence on that topic was louder than any argument we could have had. It was a confirmation. This wasn't a mistake. It was a policy. I started noticing things I'd previously dismissed. The way she'd stopped asking for my advice and started quoting Eleanor Parker. "Eleanor says that a summer wedding is hopelessly cliche. Eleanor thinks our registry should be focused on investment art, not kitchen appliances. Eleanor says it's crucial to cultivate the right social circle." It was a slow and steady indoctrination, and my daughter was a willing student. My sister Carol called me that Friday. She's a no-nonsense ER nurse who can spot a lie from 50 paces. She's 2 years younger than me, and since Sarah passed, she'd appointed herself my guardian, checking in to make sure I was eating properly and not drowning in my work. "Mike, you sound terrible," she said, dispensing with hellos. "What's going on?" I tried to play it off. "Just a long week, Carol. Big project, you know how it is." "Cut the crap, Michael," she retorted. "I know your long, weak voice, and this isn't it. This is your world is ending, but I'm going to pretend to be a block of granite voice. Talk to me. Is it Jessica?" The dam broke. I didn't mean for it to, but her directness sliced through my carefully constructed composure. I told her everything. The phone call, the breezy dismissal, the phrase, "just close friends," the country club, Eleanor. As I spoke, the words felt heavy and ugly, the story of a fool. When I finished, the line was silent for a long moment. I could picture her on the other end, probably standing in her kitchen, one hand on her hip, her brow furrowed in a way that meant someone was about to feel her wrath. "That woman," Carol said, her voice low and dangerous. "That pretentious social climbing harpy. And Jessica, oh, Mikey, I am so sorry." "It's my fault," I heard myself say, the words tasting like ash. "I spoiled her. I gave her everything, so she never learned the value of anything, especially people." "Stop that right now," Carol snapped, her nurse's voice taking over. "You were a grieving husband trying to be both parents to a daughter you adore. You gave her love and security. It's not a crime to provide for your child. The crime is her throwing that love back in your face for a shiny new family with a checkbook and a pedigree. What are you going to do?" "What can I do?" I asked, the helplessness washing over me again. She's a grown woman. If I say anything, I'm the bitter old man who's trying to control her. If I cut her off, I'm the villain who's using money to punish her. They've put me in an impossible position." "Have they?" Carol asked quietly. "Or have they just shown you exactly who they are?" You need to believe them, Mike. When people show you who they are, you believe them the first time. Her words stuck with me long after we hung up. Believe them. I spent the weekend rattling around in the big, empty house that Sarah had filled with so much laughter and warmth. Every room held a memory of the Jessica I thought I knew. There she was, aged 6, proudly showing me a finger painting, her hands a mess of primary colors. There she was at 16, crying on my shoulder after her first breakup, assuring me she would never, ever fall in love again. And there she was, just last year, graduating from college. Her arm linked through mine, her smile so bright I thought my heart would burst with pride. Where did that girl go? When did she get replaced by this stranger who spoke with Eleanor Parker's voice? The turning point came on a dreary, overcast Sunday afternoon. I'd been driving aimlessly, a habit I'd picked up after Sarah died, just following roads without a destination. I found myself in the upscale shopping district downtown, a place I usually avoided. The sidewalks were filled with impeccably dressed people carrying expensive-looking shopping bags. And then I saw her. Jessica was coming out of a ridiculously high-end boutique, the kind of place where a single scarf cost more than my first month's rent. She wasn't alone. She was with Eleanor Parker. They were laughing, their heads close together like co-conspirators. Jessica was holding up a small, elegant box, and Eleanor was clapping her hands together in delight. My daughter was glowing. It was a look of pure, unadulterated happiness. And she was sharing it with this other woman. Eleanor reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind Jessica's ear, a gesture of casual intimacy that felt like a punch to the gut. That was my job. That was Sarah's. I was parked across the street, partially hidden by a delivery van. They didn't see me. I watched as Liam pulled up in his gleaming silver sports car, a machine designed for speed and attention. He got out, kissed Jessica, and then gave his mother a deferential hug. The three of them stood there for a moment, a perfect little portrait of wealth and privilege. They looked like a family, a complete, happy family. And I was nothing more than a ghost, a spectator watching a life I was no longer a part of. Worse, I was the silent, invisible benefactor funding the entire production. Jessica's purse was one I recognized. I'd winced when I saw the charge for it on the credit card statement a few months back. Liam's car, I suspected, was leased with money that probably came from his savvy investments, likely funded by the generous startup cash I'd given Jessica after her graduation. I sat there in my sturdy, reliable, American-made pickup truck, the engine idling quietly, and I felt a profound sense of clarity. Carol was right. They had shown me exactly who they were. They weren't just excluding me. They were replacing me. They were systematically erasing my role in Jessica's life, all while enjoying the fruits of my labor. The hurt that had been a dull, heavy ache began to transform, sharpening into something else. It was cold, hard, and clear. It was resolve. They got into the car and drove away, disappearing into traffic. I didn't follow. I just sat there as the sky opened up and rain began to fall, sheeting down my windshield and blurring the expensive storefronts into a watercolor mess. The numbness was gone, replaced by a chilling calm. The question was no longer, what can I do? The question was, what must I do? I was a builder. I knew that sometimes, if the foundation is rotten, you don't patch it up. You don't try to salvage the parts that look okay on the surface. You have to tear the whole thing down to the studs and start over. And as I put my truck in gear and pulled away from the curb, I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and liberating, that a demolition was in order. The next Monday morning, I didn't go to the construction site. I didn't even go to my office. Instead, I went to a small, quiet coffee shop a few blocks away, a place with worn wooden tables and the rich, dark smell of freshly ground beans. I sat in a corner booth with a legal pad, a pen, and a large black coffee. The anger and hurt from the day before had settled into a kind of grim determination. I was a man of plans and logistics. I built things, And now I was going to deconstruct something. The web of deceit that had been woven around me. It was time to move from feeling to fact-finding. My first call was to my sister, Carol. "I need a favor," I said, my voice even. "You know Maria, your old friend who works in event planning at the Crestwood Hills Country Club?" There was a pause. "Mike, what are you doing?" "Carol, you told me to believe them." "I do. Now I need to know exactly what it is I'm believing," I said. "I'm not looking for a fight. I'm looking for the truth. I just need to know the details of the party. Guest list, size, who paid." "Can you ask her?" Discreetly. I could hear the hesitation in her voice, but she knew me well enough to understand I wasn't on a vengeful whim. This was calculated. "All right, Mike. But be careful. This could get ugly." "It's already ugly," I replied. "I'm just turning on the lights." While I waited for Carol to call back, I started making a list on my legal pad. It was a financial inventory. For years, I had managed my money with a simple philosophy: work hard, save smart, and be generous with your family. Jessica was the primary beneficiary of that generosity. I had set up a trust for her when she was born, one that she would gain full access to when she turned 30. Until then, I was the trustee, and I provided her with a substantial monthly allowance that was deposited directly into her checking account. On top of that was the supplementary credit card, the one I'd given her in college for books and emergencies. I pulled up my online banking portal on my phone, my fingers feeling strangely disconnected from my brain as I navigated the familiar screens. The credit card statement was the first thing I opened. I scrolled through the last few months of charges. It was a digital diary of a life I knew nothing about. There were thousands of dollars spent at boutiques with names I couldn't pronounce. There were charges for lavish dinners at restaurants where a single steak cost more than a week's worth of groceries. There were spa days, weekend trips to wine country, and a particularly eye-watering charge from 2 months ago at a high-end jeweler. A deposit, the memo read, for a custom engagement ring. Liam's engagement ring for my daughter, paid for by me. The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. He hadn't even bought the ring himself. He'd used my money to stake his claim on my daughter. My phone buzzed. It was Carol. Her voice was tight. "Okay, Mike." I spoke to Maria. She was hesitant to talk, but she's known me since 3rd grade. She said the Parker party was the talk of the club. "What did she say?" I asked, my pen poised over the notepad. "First, it wasn't small or intimate. They booked the main ballroom. Maria said there were over 150 people there. 150. My hand tightened on the pen. It was all of Eleanor Parker's social circle. Bankers, lawyers, old money types. Maria said Eleanor was holding court all night, introducing Jessica as our lovely new daughter-to-be. She made a big speech about welcoming Jessica into a family with history and standing. "And who paid for this?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "That's the interesting part," Carol said. "Eleanor Parker put her name on the booking, but the deposit was paid with a credit card. And when the final bill came due the night of the event, there was some kind of issue. A temporary hold on Eleanor's account, she claimed. She made a big scene, very quiet and dignified, of course. Then Jessica stepped in and said, 'Don't worry, Eleanor, I'll handle it.' She paid the entire bill, over $25,000, on her credit card. My credit card, the emergency card. My blood ran cold. They had planned it. They had orchestrated this entire event on my dime, turning my generosity into a tool for their social climbing. And they had done it while deliberately excluding me from the room. They weren't just using my daughter. They were using me as their invisible, silent bank. "There's more, Mike," Carol said, her voice dropping. "Maria overheard Eleanor talking to one of her friends. The friend asked where you were, and Eleanor laughed, this little tinkling sound, and said, 'Oh, Michael is a dear, but he's a very simple man. He's much more comfortable with a hammer than a champagne flute.' We didn't want to make him feel out of place. The friend said something about you being the one who pays for all this, and Eleanor just smiled and said, 'Well, that's what loving fathers do, isn't it? They provide. It's his way of contributing.' Contributing? Like I was a donor to their cause. Not a father, not a grandfather-to-be, but a line of credit. The casual, condescending cruelty of it stole my breath. They hadn't just shut me out. They had mocked me, belittled me, and reduced my life's work to a punchline in their rarefied world. After I hung up with Carol, I sat in that coffee shop for a long time, the coffee in my cup growing cold. The feeling of resolve had now hardened into something like ice. I wasn't just on a fact-finding mission anymore. This was a rescue operation. I had to rescue my daughter from these predators, and I had to rescue my own dignity. But there was another piece of the puzzle I needed. The wedding. Jessica's breathless chatter about florists and caterers wasn't just idle talk. They were planning something, and I had a sinking feeling they were moving fast. I thought about the people I knew in the city. After 30 years in the construction business, you build more than just buildings. You build a network. I knew event suppliers, florists, caterers, the owners of half the high-end venues in town. I had built some of them. I started making calls. I kept my story simple and vague. "Hi, George. It's Mike Carter. Say, my daughter just got engaged, and I'm trying to get a sense of what the hot venues are these days. Has a Jessica Carter or a Liam Parker come through your books recently?" The first 3 calls were dead ends, but the fourth one hit. It was a man named Sal, who owned the Water's Edge, a stunning, ridiculously expensive venue overlooking the bay. It was booked solid for 2 years in advance. "Mike, good to hear from you." Sal's booming voice came through the phone. "Congrats on the girl. Yeah, they were here. Nice young couple. The mother-in-law, though, she was a piece of work, a real battle axe." My heart started pounding, a slow, heavy drumbeat. They were there? Did they book something? Book something? Mike, they took the last prime Saturday we had next June. A cancellation that came in that morning. The mother, Eleanor, called it Providence. They signed the contract on the spot, Sal said. Paid the $50,000 non-refundable deposit right then and there. $50,000 non-refundable. How did they pay, Sal? I asked, already knowing the answer. Credit card, he said. The daughter's, Jessica. Card went through without a hitch. They're all set for June 10th, 2026. I felt a dizzying wave of disbelief, followed by a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. They weren't just planning a wedding behind my back. They had taken a huge, irreversible financial step, locking in a date, a venue, and forfeiting a sum of money that could serve as a down payment on a house, all without a single word to me. This was no longer a matter of disrespect or social maneuvering. This was a coordinated financial assault. They were moving quickly, locking in contracts, spending my money with reckless abandon, trying to create a situation so financially entangled that I would have no choice but to go along with it, to fund the entire $500,000 spectacle they were planning. They were trapping me. I thanked Sal for the information, my voice sounding unnaturally calm. I hung up the phone and stared down at my legal pad. On one side was a list of my assets, the fruits of a lifetime of hard work. On the other side was a list of my daughter's recent expenditures, the party, the ring, the venue. It was a balance sheet of betrayal. The ice in my veins was no longer just cold, it was sharp. I finally understood the full scope of their plan. They saw me as an open vault, and they were trying to empty it before I even realized the door was unlocked. But they had made a critical error. They had mistaken my love for weakness. They had mistaken my generosity for foolishness. And they had forgotten one very important thing about me. I am a builder. And I know, better than anyone, that before you can build something new and strong, you have to completely and methodically tear down the rotten structure that stands in its way. And I now had the blueprints to do just that. The drive from the coffee shop to my lawyer's office was a blur. The city streets I knew so well seemed foreign, the everyday hustle and bustle of traffic and pedestrians, like a scene from a movie I was no longer in. My mind was a strange mix of absolute chaos and laser-like focus. The hurt and anger were still there, a churning sea of emotion, but floating above it all was a cold, clear sense of purpose. I had the facts. I had the evidence. Now I needed the tools. My lawyer, David Chen, has been my counsel for over 20 years. He's a small, meticulous man with graying temples and an aura of unshakable calm. He handled the legal work for my business, drew up my will, and helped me navigate the mountain of paperwork after Sarah died. He was more than a lawyer. He was a friend. His office was on the 32nd floor of a glass and steel tower, a world away from the sawdust and concrete of my own. The air smelled of leather and expensive air freshener. I sat in one of the plush chairs opposite his sprawling desk, the city skyline spread out behind him like a backdrop. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I laid out the entire story, from the phone call about the close friends party to Sal's confirmation of the $50,000 wedding deposit. I spoke in a low, even tone, recounting the facts as if I were describing a problem with a subcontractor. I kept my emotions locked down, a pressure building behind my ribs. David listened patiently, his hands steepled under his chin, his expression unreadable. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he was silent for a full minute, his gaze fixed on me. "Mike," he said finally, his voice soft but firm. "First, as your friend, I'm heartbroken for you. This is a terrible betrayal. No father should have to go through this." I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "Second," he continued, shifting into his professional tone, "as your lawyer, I can tell you that what they are doing is a textbook case of what we call undue influence, and frankly, financial elder abuse, though you're hardly an elder. They are systematically manipulating your daughter to expropriate your assets. The speed, the secrecy, the scale of the spending. This is a deliberate campaign." His words, cold and clinical, were a strange comfort. They validated everything I was feeling, stripping away the emotional turmoil and leaving only the stark reality of the situation. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't a paranoid father. I was a man under attack. "What do I do, David?" I asked. "How do I stop this?" "We stop the flow of funds," he said simply, his calm efficiency a balm to my frayed nerves. "Immediately. We protect your assets and sever their access. It will be painful, but it is the only way. You've given your daughter a supplementary credit card on your personal account. That makes you liable for every charge she or they rack up. We need to shut that down today, not tomorrow. Today." He swiveled in his chair and picked up his phone. I'll get my assistant to contact the credit card company's fraud and security department. We will report the card as compromised and have it canceled immediately. They will not be able to use it again, effective within the hour. The thought of Jessica, somewhere in the city suddenly finding her magic card declined, was a strange mix of terrifying and satisfying. Next, David went on, pulling a fresh legal pad towards him. The allowance. You said it's a direct deposit from your personal account into hers. We stopped that as well. You can do that through your bank's online portal this afternoon. The next scheduled payment will simply not arrive. I nodded again, feeling a sense of control beginning to return. This was a language I understood. Clear, decisive action. The most important piece, David said, his eyes serious, is the trust. You are the sole trustee until she is 30. They know this. I would bet my career that their entire plan hinges on getting married, presenting a united front, and then attempting to legally compel you to release funds for their support as a married couple. Or they might even try to have you declared incompetent to manage it. It's an old, ugly playbook. A wave of nausea washed over me. The idea that they would try to paint me as mentally unfit, the man who built an empire from nothing, was a violation almost too great to comprehend. So we fortify it, David said, his voice hard. I'm going to draft a declaration for you to sign. It will reaffirm your position as trustee and state, for the record, your concerns about undue influence and financial exploitation regarding your daughter, Jessica Carter, by her fiancé, Liam Parker, and his mother, Eleanor Parker. We will have it notarized. It won't stop them from trying something, but it will create a powerful legal record of your state of mind and your intentions before they make a move. It's a shield. For the next 2 hours, we worked. David dictated memos, his assistant made calls, and I sat at his conference table with my laptop, methodically and dispassionately dismantling the financial scaffolding that had supported my daughter's life. I logged into my bank account, my fingers hovering over the screen. I saw the recurring payment. Monthly allowance, Jessica. It had been running like clockwork for 6 years, since she started college. With 3 clicks, I canceled it. The confirmation message flashed on the screen. Your scheduled payment has been successfully deleted. It felt like cutting a rope. Then I logged into the credit card portal. I found the option to manage authorized users. There was her name, Jessica Sarah Carter, next to a picture of her smiling driver's license photo. Cardholder since 2019. I clicked Remove User. A box popped up. Are you sure you want to remove this user? All charging privileges will be immediately revoked. I stared at her smiling face for a long moment. The girl in the photo seemed like a stranger now. I clicked Confirm. A strange quiet settled over me. The actions were done. The financial ties, the ones that had been twisted into weapons against me, were severed. I felt strangely hollowed out, empty. There was no triumph, no satisfaction. Just a vast, aching sadness. I had just financially disowned my own child. Mike, David said, bringing me a glass of water. You did the right thing. This isn't punishment. This is protection. You're protecting your legacy. And in a way, you're protecting her from them. A parasite will eventually kill its host. You've just cut off their food supply. Now we wait and see how the parasite reacts. I spent the rest of the day in a daze. I went back to my office, but I couldn't focus on the blueprints. I called my site foreman and told him I was taking a few personal days. He was concerned, but didn't press. I drove home, the late afternoon sun casting long, lonely shadows. The house was silent. Too silent. I walked into the kitchen and saw the calendar hanging on the wall, the one Sarah had bought. It had pictures of classic American barns for every month. I looked at the date. August 25th. A week to the day since Jessica's breezy phone call. A week since my world had tilted on its axis. That evening, I called Carol and told her what I had done. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Good. It was the hardest thing to do, which is why it was the right thing to do. Now, you need to prepare yourself, Mike. The fallout is coming. When that girl's card gets declined, she's going to call you. She's going to scream, she's going to cry, she's going to accuse. You need to be ready." "I know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "No, you don't," she countered gently. "You think you do, but you're her father. Your heart is going to want to cave the second you hear her voice. You need to remember what they did. Remember the words, 'simple man.' Remember his way of contributing. Write them down if you have to. Tape them to the phone. Don't let them manipulate you back into the role they wrote for you." After we hung up, I walked into my study. I found a small sticky note and a pen. In block letters, I wrote, "Just close friends." Then, underneath it, his way of contributing. I peeled the note off the pad and stuck it to the base of the telephone on my nightstand. It was a stark, ugly reminder. A shield, just as David had said. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the dark, waiting for a phone call that I both dreaded and, in a strange way, welcomed. The calm before the storm. The quiet ticking of the clock in the hall was the only sound, counting down the seconds to a confrontation that would change everything. Forever. The call didn't come that night, or the next day. A strange, tense silence stretched over the next week. It was a week of ghosts and shadows. Every time the phone rang, my stomach clenched. Every email notification made my heart jump. I was living in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the inevitable impact. I spent the days at the construction site, throwing myself into the physical labor, needing the simplicity of concrete and steel, of things I could measure and control. I'd talk with my crew, share a coffee from a thermos, and for a few hours, I could almost forget the gaping hole that had been torn in my personal life. But then I would go home to the big, quiet house, and the waiting would begin again. I imagined all sorts of scenarios. Maybe Jessica hadn't used the card yet. Maybe the allowance payment wasn't due for a few more days and she hadn't noticed its absence. Or maybe, and this was the most chilling thought, she knew. Maybe she had found out and was planning a more strategic response with her puppet masters, Liam and Eleanor. The not knowing was a unique kind of torture. Then, on Tuesday, exactly a week after I'd visited David's office, it happened. It was late afternoon. I was at home, standing in the kitchen, trying to decide if I had the energy to cook a real meal. The air was thick with the smell of an impending thunderstorm, the sky outside a bruised purple gray. I was staring at the sticky note I'd moved from the bedroom phone to the one on the kitchen wall. Just close friends. His way of contributing. The words had lost none of their sting. The phone rang. The caller ID flashed a name that was once the source of my greatest joy. Jessica. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the receiver. I took a deep, deliberate breath, my eyes fixed on the note. I clicked the button. "Hello?" I said, my voice much calmer than I felt. "Dad." Her voice was a shriek of pure panic and fury. It was so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear for a second. "Dad, what is going on? My card was just declined. I'm here at the bridal salon with Eleanor, trying to pay for my wedding dress, and it was declined. Declined! Do you have any idea how embarrassing that is?" The scene flashed in my mind. Jessica, standing in a cloud of white silk and lace, a horrified look on her face. Eleanor standing beside her, her expression probably a perfect mask of disappointed sympathy, while inwardly she was probably thrilled by the drama. I took another breath. I had rehearsed this moment 100 times in my head. But now that it was here, the urge to soothe her, to fix her problem, was a powerful, primal instinct. I looked at the sticky note. I remembered Sal's voice telling me about the $50,000 deposit. I remembered Carol's account of Eleanor's condescending words. The instinct to fix it receded, replaced by that cold, hard resolve. "Oh," I said, my voice level, calm, and quiet. It was the voice I used on a chaotic work site when everything was going wrong and my crew needed a steady hand. "That's strange." "Strange? Dad, it's a nightmare," she wailed. "The woman ran it 3 times. Everyone was staring. Eleanor had to pay for it on her card. She was mortified. You have to call the bank. There must be some kind of fraud alert or something. Fix it." Fix it. The 2 words she had been saying to me her whole life. When her bike chain fell off, when she got a bad grade, when her heart was broken. I had always fixed it. But not this time. "There's no mistake, Jessica," I said, my voice still quiet. The calm seemed to infuriate her more than shouting would have. "What do you mean there's no mistake? Of course there's a mistake. It's your card." "No, actually it's not anymore," I replied, the words coming out more easily than I expected. "I canceled it." There was a moment of pure, unadulterated shock on the other end of the line. The silence was so profound, I could hear her sharp intake of breath. I could also hear a muffled voice in the background. Eleanor, no doubt, asking what was going on. "You? What?" Jessica finally stammered, her voice dropping to a whisper of disbelief. "You canceled my card? Why would you do that? How could you do that to me?" And here it was, the moment of truth. I could have listed a dozen reasons, thrown accusations, yelled about the party. But I chose my words carefully, aiming for precision, not collateral damage. "I know why it won't work, Jessica," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "It's because that card was for family." I paused, letting the words sink in. "After I learned that I wasn't considered a close friend for your engagement party, I figured it was time to make some adjustments to things that were meant for, close family." The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever experienced. It was a silence filled with dawning comprehension, with shame, with the crashing realization that her actions had consequences. I could almost feel the heat of her humiliation traveling through the phone line. "The engagement party?" she finally squeaked, her voice small and childlike. "You're doing this because of a party? That is so petty. I can't believe you." The anger was back, but it was different now. It was defensive. It was the desperate lashing out of someone who had been caught. "A party?" I replied, a hint of steel entering my voice for the first time. "No, Jessica. I'm not doing this because of a party. I'm doing this because of what that party represented. It represented a choice you made, and choices have outcomes. You also seem to be out of funds in your checking account, and that's because I also chose to stop paying an allowance to someone who doesn't seem to need my presence in her life. Only my money." I could hear her starting to cry now, hiccuping sobs of frustration and disbelief. "But the wedding, the plans. How am I supposed to pay for anything? Dad, you're ruining everything." "I'm not the one who booked a $50,000 venue behind my father's back, Jessica," I said calmly. "I'm not the one who dropped $25,000 on a party I didn't invite him to. Those were your choices. You and Liam, and Eleanor. You all seemed to have it figured out. So I decided to step back and let you handle it. You're a team after all. You don't understand, she sobbed. Oh, I think for the first time in a long time, I understand perfectly, I said. I understand that I'm seen as a simple man who is good for contributing. Well, this contributor is closing his checkbook. There was a muffled sound, and then Eleanor's voice, sharp and cold as ice, came on the line. Michael, this is Eleanor Parker. I think you are behaving abominably. You are upsetting your daughter and jeopardizing her happiness over a simple misunderstanding. Eleanor, I said, my voice dropping even lower, becoming dangerously soft. There is no misunderstanding. You and I both know exactly what's been going on. And I suggest you stay out of this conversation between a father and his daughter. You've caused enough damage already. I heard a sharp gasp. No one, I imagine, had spoken to Eleanor Parker like that in a very long time. Jessica came back on the line, her voice pleading. Dad, please, just turn the card back on. We can talk about this later. I'm begging you. It was the moment of my greatest test. Her begging was a powerful weapon, but I looked at the note on my wall, and I thought of the future they had planned for me. A future as their silent, smiling ATM. No, Jessica, I said. My voice was final. There was no anger in it, only a profound and unshakable sadness. We can't talk about this later. The time for talking has passed. You made your priorities very clear. Now I'm making mine. When you are ready to have a real, honest conversation, without Liam or his mother in your ear, you know where I live. Goodbye. And with that, I gently pressed the end call button. I stood there in the silent kitchen, the receiver still in my hand. The storm had finally broken outside, rain lashing against the windows, a low rumble of thunder echoing in the distance. I hadn't won. There was no victory in this. I had just survived the first wave of a hurricane that I had, myself, set in motion. The house felt impossibly large and empty. I had severed the last real tie to my daughter. And as the reality of that settled in, I sank into a kitchen chair and put my head in my hands, not sure if I had just saved my family or destroyed it completely. 2 days passed in a heavy, ringing silence. I didn't hear from her. I had expected a siege. Angry texts, pleading voicemails, an ambush at my office. But there was nothing. The silence was unnerving. It gave my mind too much space to work, to second-guess myself. Had I been too harsh? Had I pushed her away for good? The image of her crying in that bridal salon was burned into my memory. A part of me, the fatherly part that was wired to protect and provide, screamed that I had made a terrible mistake. But another part, the part that had been wounded and disrespected, knew I'd had no other choice. On the third day, a Thursday evening, she came. The storm from the other night had passed, leaving the air washed clean and cool. I was in the living room, trying to read a book. But I'd been staring at the same page for 20 minutes. The doorbell rang, a sharp, sudden chime that cut through the quiet of the house. I knew it was her. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. It was Jessica, standing alone on the porch. She looked diminished. She wasn't wearing her usual designer clothes, but a simple pair of jeans and a sweatshirt. Her face was pale and puffy, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. All the polished, confident gloss the Parkers had lacquered onto her had been stripped away. She just looked like a lost, sad young woman. My daughter. I opened the door. We stood there for a long moment, the space between us filled with 1,000 unspoken things. Can I come in? She asked, her voice small and hoarse. I stepped back and held the door open. She walked past me into the foyer, her shoulders slumped. She didn't go into the living room, but stood awkwardly by the staircase, clutching her purse like a shield. I don't understand why you're doing this, she began, her voice trembling but laced with a familiar thread of accusation. You're trying to control me? You never liked Liam, and now you're using your money to break us up. Eleanor said you would. The mention of Eleanor's name sent a flash of anger through me, but I pushed it down. I had to stay calm. This isn't about controlling you, Jessica. It never has been, I said, my voice even. This is about respect, something you and the Parkers seem to have forgotten. Respect, she shot back, her eyes flashing with defiance. How is cutting me off financially respectful? How is humiliating me in front of my future mother-in-law respectful? Let's talk about respect, I said, stepping closer. Is it respectful to have an engagement party and not invite your own father? Is it respectful to spend $25,000 of his money on that party without his knowledge? Is it respectful to mock him behind his back, calling him a simple man who isn't fit for your new, sophisticated life? Her face went white. The defiance in her eyes flickered and died, replaced by a look of stunned horror. She hadn't known I knew that part. Who told you that? She whispered. It doesn't matter who told me. It matters that it was said. It matters that you stood there and let her say it. I replied, my voice hard with the memory of the hurt. And let's talk about the wedding. A $50,000 non-refundable deposit on a venue, Jessica. Did you ever plan on telling me about that? Or was I just supposed to get an invitation in the mail and a bill for the remaining $450,000? She flinched as if I had struck her. She sank down onto the bottom step of the staircase, all the fight going out of her. She wrapped her arms around her knees and started to cry, not the angry, frustrated tears from the phone call, but deep, wrenching sobs of genuine despair. I didn't know what to do. She wept into her knees. Eleanor said it was the only way. She said you were old-fashioned and wouldn't understand the kind of wedding a family like theirs required. She said you'd try to cheap out, to have it in the backyard with a barbecue. She said that about the home you grew up in? I asked softly, the insult to Sarah's memory a fresh wound. Jessica nodded, her face still buried. She said we had to present you with a done deal, that once everything was booked and deposits were paid, you'd have no choice but to go along with it for my sake, to not cause a scene. It was exactly as David and I had suspected. A planned, coercive campaign. My anger towards Jessica began to soften, replaced by a burning rage at the people who had so expertly manipulated her. They had used her love for me, her fear of disappointing me, and her desire for their approval as weapons. And Liam? I asked. What did Liam say? She looked up, her face tear-streaked and blotchy. Liam agreed with his mother. He said it was just how things are done in their world. He said it was important for his career to have the right kind of wedding, to solidify his place in their circle. She let out a humorless, watery laugh. Solidify his place. That's a good one. What do you mean? I asked, sensing another layer was about to be peeled back. She took a shaky breath and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. After you cut off the card, everything fell apart. Liam was furious. Not because I was hurt, but because our plan was ruined. Eleanor was livid. The perfect image was cracked. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. They started fighting. In front of me. Liam and his mother. He was screaming at her that her plan was stupid, that he told her you'd find out. And she screamed back at him. She paused, swallowing hard. And then it all came out. The real reason for the rush. The real reason for everything. I waited, my heart pounding. "Liam, he's in trouble, Dad," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Big trouble. He made some bad investments. Lost a lot of money, not just his own, but other people's. He's being pursued by creditors. He's on the verge of financial ruin. His family isn't old money anymore. It's just old. They have the house and the club membership, but the cash is gone." The final, ugly puzzle piece clicked into place. This was never about love. It was a bailout, a merger and acquisition. They weren't welcoming a new daughter. They were acquiring a new asset, me. "The wedding," she continued, her voice hollow with disillusionment, "wasn't a celebration. It was a lifeline. They thought that once we were married, they'd have access to my trust fund. They were talking about it like it was a done deal. Liam was telling his mother that once the old man was out of the picture as trustee, they could use the money to pay off his debts and rebuild the Parker family fortune." Out of the picture. The words hung in the air, cold and menacing. "I was their solution," Jessica whispered, looking up at me, her eyes wide with the horror of her own unwitting role in the scheme. My entire life with him. It was a business transaction. And I was so stupid. I bought into all of it. The glamour, the family name. I wanted to be part of it so badly that I was willing to push you away. Because you didn't fit into their picture. She finally broke down completely. "I'm so sorry, Daddy," she cried, using a name she hadn't called me since she was a little girl. "I'm so sorry." I crossed the space between us and sat down on the step beside her. I didn't say anything. I just reached out and pulled her into my arms, holding her as she shook with sobs. She felt so small, so fragile. She was my daughter again. Not the polished socialite in training, but the little girl who had scraped her knee and needed her dad. The anger was gone, washed away by a powerful, aching wave of love and pity. They had hurt her. They had used her and broken her heart far more deeply than I could have imagined. My quiet war of attrition hadn't just been about protecting my finances. It had been about saving her from a ruinous future she couldn't even see. And in that moment, holding my weeping daughter in the hall of our family home, I knew the fight was over. But the damage, the deep, structural damage to our own foundation, was something we were only just beginning to assess. The months that followed the confrontation were quiet and difficult. There was no magical reconciliation, no single moment where everything was suddenly okay again. The breakup with Liam was swift and brutal. Once Jessica confronted him with what she knew, the charming Fay Aide crumbled, revealing the desperate, cornered man beneath. He and Eleanor unleashed a torrent of bitter accusations. But their power was gone. Without the promise of my money, Jessica was no longer an asset, and they discarded her with cold efficiency. The $50,000 deposit for the wedding venue was lost, a final, expensive monument to their failed scheme. For Jessica, it was like waking up from a long, intoxicating dream into a harsh, colorless reality. The life she thought she was building had been a mirage, and the people she thought were her new family were nothing more than con artists. She was heartbroken, not for the loss of Liam, but for the loss of the illusion. More than that, she was profoundly, deeply ashamed. She moved back into her childhood bedroom in my house. At first, it was an awkward and painful cohabitation. We tiptoed around each other, the cavernous space of what we hadn't said echoing in the silence. The trust between us was shattered. I loved her, of course. That had never been in question. But I didn't know if I could ever look at her without remembering the casual cruelty of that phone call, the sting of being cast aside for something shinier. And she, I think, couldn't look at me without seeing the man whose love she had betrayed, the man who had been forced to call her bluff in the most painful way possible. There was no allowance, no credit card. I told her I would provide a roof over her head and food in the kitchen, but the rest was up to her. For the first time in her 25 years of life, Jessica had to face the reality of earning a living. She had a degree in art history, a qualification the Parkers had found charmingly unthreatening, but one that didn't easily translate into a steady paycheck. After weeks of searching, she took a job at a local art gallery. It wasn't glamorous. She was mostly a glorified receptionist and stockroom clerk, earning a modest hourly wage. I watched her struggle, and every paternal instinct I had screamed at me to step in, to make it easier for her. But I knew that would be the worst thing I could do. This was her path now, her chance to build something of her own, something real. I saw her come home late at night, her feet aching, her face etched with a fatigue I recognized from my own early years. She learned how to budget. She learned the quiet panic of watching her checking account dwindle as rent day approached. She insisted on paying me a token amount for rent, a gesture I knew was more for her pride than for my finances. She learned the difference between what she wanted and what she needed. Slowly, painstakingly, we began to rebuild. It started with small things. One evening, I was in the kitchen making my simple bachelor dinner of pasta and sauce, and she came in and just stood there, watching. "Smells good," she said quietly. Can I help?" It was a tiny offering, but it was the first crack in the wall between us. We chopped vegetables in silence, the rhythmic tap of our knives on the cutting board the only sound. That night, we ate dinner together at the kitchen table for the first time in almost a year. We didn't talk about the Parkers or the money. We talked about her day at the gallery, about a new painting that had come in. It was normal, and it was wonderful. Another time, I came home from a long day on the site to find her on her hands and knees in the backyard, wrestling with the overgrown rose bushes that Sarah had planted years ago. Her hands were scratched, her face smudged with dirt. "Mom's roses were looking sad," she said, not looking at me. I thought I'd try to save them. We spent the rest of the weekend working in the garden together, pulling weeds, turning the soil. We were rebuilding something, side by side. The healing was not a straight line. There were days when the resentment would surface, a quick, sharp word or a sullen silence. But the foundation we were laying was real this time, built not on financial dependency, but on shared effort and a fragile, emerging respect. I began to see a strength in her I'd never seen before. A resilience that had been buried under years of privilege. She was becoming her own person, not an extension of me or an accessory for the Parkers. One Saturday afternoon, about a year after she had moved back home, she came to me in my study. She was holding a small, sealed envelope. "I want you to have this," she said, her voice steady. I opened it. Inside was a check, made out to me, for $1,000. I looked at her, confused. "What's this for?" "It's the first installment," she said, a small, proud smile on her face. "For the engagement party. I looked up the charge on your old statements. $25,642. It's going to take me a very, very long time. But I'm going to pay you back. All of it." Tears welled in my eyes. It wasn't about the money. It was about the integrity. It was the act of taking responsibility, of making amends in the most tangible way she knew how. It was the single most valuable check I had ever held. I stood up and hugged her, a real hug, one free from the weight of the past year. "I'm so proud of you, Jessica," I whispered. "Our relationship today isn't what it was. The innocent, uncomplicated bond between a doting father and a beloved daughter is gone forever. You can't unbreak something that has been shattered so completely. But what we have now is something different. It's stronger, more honest. It's been tested by the worst kind of betrayal, and somehow it has endured. We are two adults who know each other's flaws and have chosen to love each other anyway. I no longer see her as a fragile legacy to be protected, but as a resilient woman I admire. And she, I hope, no longer sees me as a walking checkbook, but as a father who loved her enough to let her fall, knowing it was the only way she would ever learn to stand on her own. The house doesn't feel so empty anymore. It feels like a home again, a place where two survivors are quietly, patiently, building something new from the wreckage of the old.